I'd like to start the talk talking a little bit about the Weimar Republic and a very fragile time in German history in the years between 1919 and 1933. It's post-war, and basically you have a very shell-shocked population. And the modern woman is emerging onto the scene at this very fragile time. And in fact, when scholars talk about the Weimar Republic, they often refer to a crisis of masculinity during this time period, given the number of men who were killed during the war, World War I, given the men who returned from the war maimed. I don't have the statistics, but it's a pretty overwhelming number of people who are damaged by the war, both physically and psychically. And so that when the modern woman emerges, it's a confluence of events. It's basically a time where women were working because somebody had to be on the home front, providing or sustaining the economy there. So women entered into the labor force during World War I. But then a seismic shift takes place during the Weimar Republic. And that's what I want to talk a little bit about here when we talk about the modern woman. I like to begin with these first two images. I think they're really, in a way, epitomize the image of the modern woman who commanded the streets in the 1920s and negotiated the metropolis. Here you see a woman in short dress, nylon stockings, cloche hat, jumping over a puddle in Berlin. And then here, a woman on a motorcycle smoking a cigarette. And these are basically, it's a really powerful iconography because it speaks to the presence of women on the streets in urban areas. And this was a very, unusual transition because in the 19th century, women were primarily found in the domestic sphere. And women who were on the streets were considered street walkers, right? So here now we have a population that is emerging at this time period and basically calling to have the same rights as the male population. So I'd like to present a quote also by Franz Hessel that appeared in Vogue magazine in 1922 that gives you a little bit of the flavor of how the modern woman is viewed during this time period. He writes, "Beautiful women of Berlin, during the day you are working, in the evenings, ready to dance. You have an athletically steeled body and beautiful skin that cosmetics just brighten up. With the same speed that your musty provincial town blossomed into a metropolis, you conscientiously obtained beautiful legs and the necessary mixture of reliability and carelessness, of vagueness and definition, of goodness and coolness." So this is basically a celebration of the modern woman. And in a nutshell, this quote highlights important moments in this historical transition from 19th to 20th century, understandings of femininity. The key words here are work, dance, athletic body, cosmetics, metropolis, legs, and coolness. There were, so to speak, these were the accessories of the modern woman who left the domestic sphere of her mother and who crossed into a new age of femininity. That woman had gained the right to vote in 1919, and with the establishment of Germany's first democracy, and it allowed them to participate in the political process. In fact, women made up 52% of the electorate in 1919 and 10% of the delegates of the National Assembly. Now, the new woman of the Weimar Republic was an icon of modernity. She graced the streets of the metropolis. and participated in the workforce outside the home. She made her appearance in films, advertisements, and art that marked her as modern precisely because of her new look and range of motion. And I think, one of the most difficult projects of putting this talk together was to assemble the many incredible images of the modern woman in the streets of the time. I mean, here you can see, this is from a magazine from 1925. And it says here that they're sharing the cost of the cab here. So her participation in the workforce and leisure activities was unprecedented, especially in Berlin, a city whose population mushroomed to about 4 million people during the 1920s. Feminization of the public sphere and the sexualization of the street, as women left the domestic sphere and appeared on the streets of the city, was, very kind of disorienting for a lot of people at the time. When I refer to the sexualization of the street, it basically means that there were many women walking, in the streets at that time, and there was actually a genre of film called the street film that featured, a vamp that preyed on the men in the streets. But I'm going to show you a clip of that later on. So that there was actually also a great confusion at the time, because many men that were walking on the streets, they would approach women thinking that they were prostitutes when they were just women going shopping and going to work, because being on the street meant being accessible.
What were some of the jobs that women would hold at this time?
I'm getting to that right in the next slide. Oops, sorry. So, as many narratives of the modern woman of the 1920s assert, she was a product of technological advances, basically in a post-war period, and of a fledgling democracy and a new post-war sensibility. In many ways, she emerged from the ashes of World War I and the havoc it wrought on Germany's post-war economy and citizenry. So some of the jobs that she had, let me get to that in one moment. In 1925, there were close to 11 to 12 million women employed in Germany. Percentage-wise, this was higher than any other European country. The post-war market called for the involvement of women who entered the public space and changed the face of the labor force, the cultural landscape, and cityscape. Now, historically, the new woman was a clerical worker. She was a new class of workers, actually, that emerged during this time period. She may have been a secretary, a receptionist, a typist. She could have been a salesperson. So it was, the modern woman basically belonged to the new emerging middle class, moving from a proletariat, industrial working class to a new kind of a new middle class, but a lower middle class. She may have gone to the movies in the evening, walked in the park, sat in a cafe, or went to a dance hall. There was really an explosion of leisure activity possibilities during the Weimar Republic. She wanted to be, but primarily glamorous. And the fashion industry, in a way, fueled that desire that she had. The newfound freedom signified also a new eroticism, limited only by fears of venereal disease and unwanted pregnancy. The reality, however, was different given the historical circumstance of the Weimar Republic. Now, for many of you who are familiar with kind of the historical trajectory of the Weimar Republic, you know that from 1919 to about 1924, Germany was experiencing hyperinflation. and a time of real political uncertainty and a lot of social turmoil, social changes, trying to also implement a democracy at that time. You may have seen images of people walking with wheelbarrows full of money to the grocery store, and or money being burned, because it was better to burn it to have heat than to use it for to purchase anything. So this is kind of the fragile ground. Then in the kind of the heyday of the 1920s, which went from 1925 to 29, when the economy was booming, I think that is really when the modern woman came to into her own. Also, with women working, there was the big question of, for example, the headline in this newspaper, should married women also work? And these were very, very controversial issues, because the modern woman was perceived as not supporting these traditional institutions, so that the whole idea of balancing work with a profession became a pretty hotly debated topic during the Weimar Republic. As other topics also, abortion, paragraph 218, which criminalized abortion, was also discussed quite a bit at the time. And also the whole idea of a double burden. It was a term that was first introduced in Germany during the 1920s. Now, with the New Age also came a new body type, interestingly enough. So the body type that became the ideal was pretty boyish, actually, for a woman. Small breasts, narrow hips, very thin, and of course, short hair. Now, her short haircut in a page, or the Bubikopf, as it's called in German, and short hemlines were best suited for women who were on the go with aspirations. And one of the things I've loved about, researching the modern woman is that you find out things, or you think about aspects of culture that you wouldn't necessarily think about before. Because of the Bubikopf, there was suddenly, the people who cut hair were making lots and lots of money. So they were really in favor of women with short hair. There's a whole subculture economically that was profiting from this. So also, you could see women's legs for the first time. And there have been many, and there were actually very many beauty contests or images in magazines comparing women's legs, and people would be able to vote which legs were the most beautiful. For those of you who know Marlene Dietrich, you also know that the legs became very significant during that time period. Now, some researchers have said that fetishizing women's legs was almost a response to the many amputations of men during that time period. So it's almost like a really displaced fascination onto women from the male body. But that's a whole different topic. So, but the modern woman, very fashion conscious, had plenty of magazines to consume, and that featured the latest trends and showcased socialites and stars who reported on lifestyles and displayed assorted advertisements that fed and fueled the needs of the new age, in addition to offering tips on how to best negotiate the demands and seductions of modernity. The modern woman dreamed of being a film star or of finding a husband who would secure upward mobility. She learned to flirt. That was a new word in the German language, flirt, in English. She learned to smoke, to sing along with the latest hits without any political inclinations, actually. Or she may have been a boundary-breaking woman, one of the avant-gardes, an artist, a photographer, a film star who self-consciously took full advantage of the unprecedented opportunities of the 1920s. Some names of these avant-garde artists that come to mind are, for example, Hannah Höch, and I'm going to show you one of her collages at the end, the photographer Germaine Krull, who went out into the streets and made some fabulous photographs of the cityscape in Berlin, and of course the film star Marlene Dietrich, who I mentioned many times, and Jean Mamen, another avant-garde painter of the time, and I'll show you some of their work. The Weimar Republic, though, was obsessed with taxonomies. There was literally a classification mania that could be seen as a symptom of trying to organize the chaos of the time. Indeed, there were also many how-to guides for modern women that provided tips on how to be modern in all spheres of life, from the bedroom to the workplace. The different types of women were, the first one was the girl, and this is the word that was used in German. It was called the girl. And the girl typically had the page boy haircut and the type of body that I described before, slender hips, small breasts, and was very fashionable. This is actually a picture, you may recognize her, of Louise Brooks. She is an American actress who was in a number of very popular films made in Germany at the time. One of them is Pandora's Box. The other one is The Diary of a Lost Girl. So she starred in a number of films by Pabst and came to represent this notion of the girl. Also at this time was another typology called, in French, the garçon. And garçon, if you know, in French means boy. This woman had a male haircut, short hair. This is actually a photograph that was taken by August Sander, a very famous photographer of the Weimar Republic. And this is a secretary, okay, but also a garçon. And the garçon had a short haircut, was very androgynous, and in kind of leisure time, oftentimes would wear a monocle and pants or a tailored suit. Now, there were three types, actually, that were classified. You had the girl, the garçon, and then the last type was Gretchen. And you can imagine what the Gretchen looked like. Definitely not the modern woman. Here I have kind of a spoof on how the Gretchen is spun. You can see I'm obsessed with Marlene Dietrich. I have to apologize here, right? But the Gretchen was kind of the symbol of the wholesome German woman. So these three types were actually recycled over and over again in the German press. And what I find very fascinating about them is that you've got the girl, the garçon, the two icons of modernity, and the words are not German. So in a way, it's indicating that these modern women are imports, right, from either France or from America or from the US. Now, the notion of gender, let's see if I can, changed considerably in the 1920s. And the modern woman was different than previous generations. And here we see that this is very explicit in this cartoon, taken from a popular magazine from 1925 from the Berlin Ullstein Verlag. You see that today's girl, or you can tell from today's girl that she can perform or she can do more than her mother could, right? So they're setting the modern woman off from the girl. And you see here the type of girl that's featured would be classified the garçon. also the athletic new woman. Mothers could not be told apart. And another problem of the time period is that, if the mother wasn't really belonging to the 19th century generation, full, with lots of clothes, then you would have mothers who wanted to look like their daughters, and there was this whole notion of staying young that was promoted during the Weimar Republic among the modern women. And one topic that I'm just going to be getting into in my research is the beginning of plastic surgery for women in the 1920s. I saw, when I was doing my archival work, I saw plenty of advertisements, the nip and the tuck. So already in the 1920s, it's kind of resculpturing the female body to be youthful and modern. So that's something that, and when you look through magazines in the 1920s, you'll see oftentimes, the salesperson will go up to the mother with the daughter standing next to her and say, is this dress for your daughter? And the mother will say, no, this is for me, and the salesperson kind of is astounded that the parent generation is taking on the accessories of youth. Now, the next image shows an athletic woman competing with a man. And oftentimes, you will read in the papers of the time that there's a vast confusion sometimes, and people are complaining that you can no longer tell men from women. And it's, that is causing an incredible social anxiety when you can't tell a man from a woman. And we know that, from our own color coding of babies, right? Between pink and blue. We like to tell gender apart somehow. And so this anxiety, here we have, this is called the Competition of Genders, 1926. And again, we have the garçon with the 19th century or early 20th century, I guess it's parents looking on here. Now, so and also in this typology of the garçon, there's a lot of talk about the masculine woman during the 1920s as the modern woman as well, and the type of anxieties that she produces. It's it really is, it's a very this is not a small topic. It's in the press all the time. It's, trying to figure out this chaos of the Weimar Republic also means trying to figure, that gender kind of becomes the site for trying to figure out how to invoke stability in Germany. And of course, they're not finding it in gender because of the vast changes that are going on. So that already in 1919, for example, you have Ernst Lubitsch's film, I Don't Want to Be a Man. And it's starring Ossi Oswalder, a very prominent German actress. And in this film, she takes on the clothes of a man and kind of camouflages herself and goes out into the streets as a man because she can do much more than she could as a woman. So, these things are already starting to break down in 1919. You can also imagine that women became the target of political discourses, and that women became the foil against which culture and social wars were waged. Women were often looked at as barometers of social progress or decline. Now, the right wing and the left wing in Germany in the 1920s had very different takes on the modern woman. The left celebrated her emergence. They saw her really as a sign of democracy, modernity, and change in Germany, moving away from a very repressive Wilhelminian 19th century authoritarian Wilhelminian culture to a more modern time. The right, however, was very concerned that women were losing sight of their obligation to propagate the race. And you can imagine that this discourse became very loud at the time because of the many people that were killed during World War I. So in order to preserve the nation, it meant having lots of kids. The right wing saw the modern woman as an affront to kind of the national needs. They also saw her as promiscuous, as anti-family, and as I said, in times when the birth rates were down, and actually the divorce rate was incredibly high, a new discourse needed to be developed for promoting marriage. And interestingly, out of that emerged a whole discussion about what type of new partnerships can be introduced that would make marriage equitable for men and women. And there were, another, like a whole stack of how to be married books in the Weimar, in this new modern time. So while liberals were envisioning new types of relationships based on equality of the sexes and new social arrangements, like partnerships, the modern woman, like this 20-year-old stenographer, this is kind of an account of what a 20-year-old said. And this is in a popular magazine. I'll translate this for you. So she writes, it's a dialogue between two co-workers, and it was published in the popular magazine Uhu. And it says, the young 20-year-old stenographer says, "I'm not going to get married. You lose your personal freedom in marriage. Marriage, the way it should be, is downright degrading." The other salesperson of the same age responds, "What do you want? Are you for free love? That isn't ideal. But I could imagine really good communal marriages, like more men and more women together. It really exists, but it isn't talked about at all." So I'm just kind of submitting this to show you, how this time period was really looking for new ways of being in this modern age. But oftentimes, the image of the vamp, the lawless woman, the very sexualized woman who preyed on unsuspecting bourgeois men was very, a good theme for film, right? So many films did feature the modern woman, but I would say more often than not, they featured the vamp. And in this film, I'm going to show you a clip here. It's a film that was made in 1929, Joe May's film Asphalt in German. And it's about a female jewel thief who is taken into custody by a policeman, and she seduces him, of course, right? So it's not only seducing the policeman, but it's seducing the law. And, she tries to get him to take her home because she doesn't have her identity card before they go to the precinct. And of course, once she gets him to her apartment, you know what happens, right? So I'm going to, let me show you this clip here. It's a wonderful. The actress here is Betty Amann, and she is an American actress who came to Berlin for this film. So let me see if I can. So I found this next slide, and I think it was very funny. It's almost like the antidote to the vamp. be a vamp, but you gotta clean your house at the same time. The vacuum cleaner is called Vampire, the brand. So, but this is, it's also the time of the modern woman, but it's also the time of a movement in the arts. It's called the New Objectivity. And it's not only actually in the arts, but it's also in design. Some of you are familiar with Bauhaus furniture, very sleek, economical, lines and design. And this New Objectivity was also basically a lifestyle at the time. And sobriety is one of its characteristics, a distance, and again, archetypes, the girl, the garçon, the Gretchen. And I would say one of the prominent terms in this time period is not only sobriety, but coolness. And you'll see that over and over characterizing the new woman of the time period. It was also a time of Taylorism and Fordism. So you have the rationalization of time and the rationalization of household. So the introduction of new technologies for the modern woman to take care of the private sphere. Also, it's a time that is really very much influenced by visual culture and window shop windows. I mean, I don't know exactly the date when display windows started becoming very prominent in the metropolis. Also, the Weimar Republic is then also talked about as a surface culture with visual culture, display windows, of course the film stars, all performing gender in very different ways. And what fascinates me here is that 19th century really tried to present one image of femininity. And suddenly you have an explosion of visual culture that, opens up the repertoire of possibilities for how to be female, how to be feminine. And this is just a page from one magazine, and you can see all the different ways of being, performing femininity at the time. This is also a time where women became very aware of themselves as spectacles. And they had, I'm sorry, so that when they walked the city streets, they could glance at their reflection in windows, adjust their lipstick and mirrors, pull a cigarette out of a smart case, and dream about the many different ways of being feminine when staring at display windows, advertisements, and films. Advertising and mass media discovered the female consumer at this time and a new target group, creating the new woman with her short hair, modern attire, thin, sporty, and cool. Now, various representations of femininity circulated during the 1920s, and there were magazines actually for all different interest groups. In Berlin alone, there were 2,000 magazines and newspapers circulating. And here I just wanted to give you a few examples. This is Das Magazin, very popular journal of the time. And then we have Die Zeitung der neuen Frau, the newspaper of the new woman. And this was more for a middle-class audience. Then you have Die Dame, which is more targeted toward upper class, kind of like a Vogue magazine type. And you had magazine for different interest groups. For example, here is Die Freundin, which was a magazine whose audience was primarily lesbian. So these things are all going on. Then, of course, we have the images like this where the new woman is really coming into a new self-awareness. And believe it or not, the word sex appeal in English is it's a word that's introduced into the German vocabulary of the time. And the new woman is kind of very conscious of cultivating her sex appeal. And of course, advertisements are showing her how to do all that. Now, not only is the outward culture very important for the new woman, but also the arena of sports. So, you have here images of women going out into nature. This is also a time in which the promotion of healthy bodies. So you'll see also many activities going out into nature, oftentimes naked. There's a promotion of being naked in nature as probably the healthiest way to regenerate yourself. There's also a new understanding, for example, of female pleasure, which I would say is something that is, in a way unprecedented, that women are not seen in constellations with family, with husbands and children, but they're really shown by themselves and thinking about what provides them with pleasure. Of course, many of these are consumable items, and like cigarettes. Here, this is a wonderful advertisement in the magazine Die Dame, the Vogue magazine, and of a woman very sportily dressed and having her cigarette. The cigarette actually became an emblem of modernity, and women smoking was, an amazing kind of revolutionary act for women because they were indulging in the same pleasures that their male counterparts were indulging in. So I have a few very nice images here from cigarette advertisements in German magazines of the time. You can see here that in this image to your right, it's almost like it's an opiate. Cigarette is seen as an opiate, so the notion of pleasure is, exoticized in this image here. Also, women were, for the first time, driving. And a lot of advertisements were targeting female drivers. The word that was oftentimes used for female drivers was chauffeuse. And you can see there's auto magazines that were targeted toward women. Of course, the car industry was very happy to be able to sell cars to women as well. Plenty of magazines here. Here, of course, you have this image features not only the female driving, but also, I guess, fixing her car, right? And the legs becoming kind of the prominent fetish here in this image. There were, as I mentioned, not only the modern woman. The modern woman was, it's a figure that is a product of advertising and commerce, but also a historical phenomenon. Generally, the modern woman was between 18 and 21 or 25, employed as a clerical worker, as I mentioned before. But then you have a whole different realm of modern women who I would say belong to the avant-garde and to the arts, who are really the trailblazers that we're talking about here. They are pushing the boundaries of, artistic representation. For example, they are performing in cabarets. Here's an image of Marlene Dietrich and Margot Leon performing in a cabaret in Berlin. The song is When My Best Girlfriend, which became kind of the anthem of lesbians in the 1920s in Berlin. Dietrich famously wore violets, which became the flower of lesbians at that time period. Then also we have, this is kind of an expression of a new morality that is a part of Berlin culture at the time. There's another image here. But it would be, remiss to talk about the modern woman as a figure that is not dealing with the complexities of the Weimar Republic, the economic depression beginning 1929, and all of the difficulties that this very unique period in German history is serving up. So that we have the very famous writer Irmgard Coyne in her novel The Artificial Silk Girl, dealing with the fantasies of the modern woman that can't really be translated into the reality of the Weimar Republic. And this is just an excerpt of her protagonist Doris, who says, "And I think it will be a good thing if I write everything down because I'm an unusual person." Okay? And I don't mean a diary. That's ridiculous for a trendy person like me. But I want to write like a movie because my life is like that, and it's going to become even more so. And I look like Colleen Moore. Some of you may recognize that name, a very famous silent film star. If she had a perm and her nose were a little more fashionable, like pointing up. And when I read it later on, everything will be like in the movies. I'm looking at myself in pictures. So you can see here that there's really a shift in terms of the way the modern woman is seeing herself primarily from outside, right, as spectacle and participating in that. Now, other writers, a painter of the time, Jean Mamen, was very interested kind of the demi-world of Weimar culture and did fabulous paintings during that time period. And then last but not least is Hannah Höch, and this is called The German Girl. And Hannah Höch is a Dadaist who created these collages from newspaper magazines. And she, shows the fragmentation of modernity, of course, the things that we were talking about, the legs, the technology, femininity, all these things coming together in her collage here. Now, so what happened to the modern woman? 1933, right? Hitler is elected, and the modern woman, along with the German avant-garde, is seen as degenerate. So the discourse of the right that I mentioned before, with the notion that the modern woman is really a front to national interests, to family, to motherhood, really becomes the dominant discourse of the Nazi movement of blood and soil. Women, again, are pushed back into the domestic sphere, and their primary role is mother. Many of you may know that during the Nazi period, that women actually received medals from the government depending on how many children that they had. So, but another interesting feature I just wanted to mention here, when I'm talking about Hannah Höch and Irmgard Coyne and Jean Mamen, it's not until the 1970s and the feminist movement that these writers and artists and the modern woman becomes part of our consciousness again. These writers, Irmgard Coyne, whose novel The Artificial Silk Girl, written in 1931, and Gilgi, Eine von uns, or One of Us, those were bestsellers. They couldn't reprint them fast enough. And as I said, it wasn't until the feminist scholars in the 1970s started doing the archaeological work of rediscovering a lot of the contributors to culture during the 1920s. And it's an amazing gold mine, I have to say, of topics and, cultural producers and discourses that, basically what amazes me is that the topics that they're grappling with in the 1920s are topics that we're still grappling with today. So thank you very much for your attention.